right? 0800 731 2000 is the number. It's time to talk about the school run. And I really have been fascinated by my next guest. I've been having a look at his work. Something really unique. The best way to describe it is he is covering London, looking at different streets and different parts of London, but with virtual graffiti. And his name, he's a poet and an artist, John Paul Flintoff, and he's so well known. People call it, and it is known as a digital pilgrimage, where basically what he does, he's walking the streets of London on Google Maps, okay? But then on these walks, he draws these beautiful illustrations. And these illustrations are from the Bible, and then they marry kind of ancient scenes with modern urban life. It's fascinating. It's got a new book out, and I'm really delighted to say that he joins me now. John Paul, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here. What a nice thing to say.
It's quite, I have to say, it's quite fascinating, the work that you do. I mean, I appreciate when COVID-19 hit, you took your pilgrimages online, didn't you? And that was where you kind of invited people to join you. But actually, it's grown and grown. Just kind of set the context of exactly what takes place for anyone who maybe hasn't heard of your work.
Sure. So I wanted to do a real-life pilgrimage. I've wanted to do one for a long time, and I thought it'd be quite fun to walk with people, to go somewhere and tell stories to each other, and it's nice to have an end destination. And then COVID came,
yes,
and I thought, I'll just do it online. I mean, it took me a second to realise that I can go on Zoom and share my screen onto Street View, and then we can all feel like we're walking down the same street. And I practically get RSI as I'm clicking down the road all the way to Canterbury from London. But, I did it over several weeks, and people joined me, and then I would do a little screenshot of whatever we were looking at. So it could be, Hyde Park or Kensington Palace or somewhere in Greenwich or wherever it was. And then we would collaborate online to draw on top of it. And usually I do this on my own, but sometimes people want to join in. So people can watch me live drawing on top of it. And I'll take a scene that has a kind of timeless quality. You mentioned some of the biblical stories.
Yes.
And you put them onto this very contemporary picture of Street View. And it's got all the Google, little signals and dots and blue circles and names of premises and things. And yet I'm still drawing this picture of, one of the ones I like most is Abraham preparing to sacrifice Isaac outside the dry cleaner on Cricklewood Lane. I just think it's really as interesting as any picture of Abraham trying to sacrifice Isaac, but it's also kind of funny because it's the bottom of Cricklewood Lane near where I live.
Yes. And the idea that you've kind of basically modernised this, I think, is what stands out for so many people. You've got a new book, haven't you, which is called Psalms for the City. But then that's a collection. It's a collection of poetry. And what I obviously love, being on BBC Radio London, you're celebrating London, aren't you?
Absolutely.
But also you're celebrating London in the aspect of the kind of the mental healing that you found. Talk to me about how London has helped you in terms of your own personal healing.
Great, I will. Thank you. I had a breakdown at the end of 2017, went into psychiatric hospital. My psychiatrist told me to get lots of exercise. I didn't belong to a gym, so I walked around all over the place. I was also in a bit of a daze, so walking helped. And it was just in the course of walking around places that I don't know and places that I know really well, that I'd find some sort of important quality to them. And what I really loved about dropping into churches, because I wasn't brought up religious, was that they were a nice, peaceful place to sit still and think about things. And I didn't have to buy a coffee, which I would have done if I was going in a cafe. So I would sit there for ages and admire all the art, especially the really beautiful churches. And it was just a nice way of thinking. And I would think about things like, so there's not much to read in a church except what they leave out for you. So I was reading the Psalms, and in the Psalms, King David complains to God about things that he's fed up with, but he also goes on about how happy he is.
Yeah.
So I thought, this is really interesting, because a psalm is like a space for you to say whatever's on your mind. You can complain, you can be delighted, whatever. So I thought, I'll write my own, and I wanted to illustrate them as well. And it got me really excited about the idea of this rich inheritance that we have of biblical stories and pictures. And whether you kind of believe in that stuff or not, there's still a lot of value in it, I think. I'm
really struck by what you're talking about, John Paul. I'll tell you why. For a lot of people, when we discuss mental health breakdowns, sometimes you may have a picture of a particular type of person, but here you are, a poet, an author. You're also a former Sunday Times journalist, talking about the fact that pretty much the streets of London helped in your healing process. And I'll tell you why I'm struck by it, because I'm trying to think about this. In the 13 years that I've been a broadcaster, I've never publicly shared this to this extent, but my father suffered with clinical depression. But I remember as a young girl, obviously not kind of understanding exactly what that meant, just that I knew that dad sometimes was okay and not okay. But I always remember the one thing my dad used to kind of press upon me and my brother was walking. He used to sometimes take my brother and I on walks, and he would always, as I got older, became a teenager, just say, if you can't do anything else, walk. And so now, as you're talking to me, I'm just really struck by the fact that for you, that was what really helped. Because, I mean, although my father and I never communicated it, I understand as an adult now that part of his healing, or part of what he was going through, walking was almost his solitude. Do you find that in particular parts of London when you were walking, that they have been that solitude for you?
Yeah, sometimes I really want to walk in company, and other times I really want to be on my own. And I never feel like I am on my own, because there's something about the forward momentum and the sense of possibility that comes with forward momentum that is, I think, in itself quite healing. And you don't have to walk fast, you don't have to walk with a particular direction, but getting out and not being stuck behind whatever it is that we're stuck behind, usually desks in lockdown. So it's like the best you could do was some sort of peering through a digital screen. But walking is always a way to open things out. And I'm really sorry to hear about your dad, and I'm really glad that you went on walks with him.
But, it's just, I genuinely am sharing this with you only because it's when I'm talking to you, I'm thinking, oh, right, that makes sense. It makes sense why my mum had a car, but he would still take my brother and I, to walk all the way down to Lambton Park in Hounslow. And, it could have been raining, but that clearly was, he instilled it in me. Look, I'll be honest with you, I love walking, and it was my greatest solitude for, like so many others, during the lockdowns. It was the one thing you could do was go for a walk. It was the one thing during the day we could all look towards, right? That 1 hour of exercise that we all got.
That's right.
John Paul, what would you say to anyone who is discovering your work and these these virtual kind of London tours that you have, but with this real spiritual connection? Because you've obviously, on the 3rd of November at 7:00, you've got a virtual pilgrimage, haven't you? And people can go. What's the best way for them to kind of find out and join you? Because I want to give those details.
Thank you. Well, I realise it could be a bit kind of complicated. So the best thing is look for my website, which is just look for my name, which is a weird name, John Paul Flintoff. And if you find on my website, I've put something on the homepage that tells you where to go. But it's on YouTube, so you don't have to do anything. You don't have to be on camera. You can just watch.
Well, it's not a weird name. It's a cool name. I think it's really cool. John Paul.
Well,
it's a really nice name. So John Paul Flintoff, I've just done that. So the website is flintoff.org is your website. So that's what people need to go to. FLINTOFF.org. Come in the studio, John Paul. I feel there's a lot more we can talk about. So I'd like to get you in the future if you're up for that.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you.
Fantastic.
What a lovely thing to say. Thank you.
Absolutely. I want to follow your journey. And thanks for joining me today. It's really been a pleasure speaking to you. You have a lovely afternoon. John Paul Flintoff. And if you would like further details, as he's just mentioned, that website, flintoff.org. It's a virtual pilgrimage taking place on the 3rd of November. I think the really beautiful thing about this, it's for everyone. So do check it out. Right. A lot more to come in the next hour of the show. 0800 731 2000. Yeah, I've never shared that about my dad. But you see, that's what happens when you have great guests and you joining me here on Radio London. I talk about things I don't often talk about. Right, let's get the news headlines at 4:00.